Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story that we are tracking for you. China's top diplomat Wang Yi is on a 4-day trip to Russia. Beijing and Moscow are expected to pledge deeper mutual political trust, readying for a possible landmark visit by President Putin to Beijing in October. Ahead of the Russia visit, Wang Yi traveled to Malta for hours of constructive talks with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Now, is Xi Jinping pursuing a China-led settlement to the Ukraine crisis with renewed vigor? As head of the Chinese Communist Party's Foreign Affairs Office, Foreign Minister Wang Yi will meet Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev. As per Russian Foreign Ministry, Wang Yi's talks with counterpart Sergei Lavrov will cover a wide range of issues, including contacts at the higher and highest levels. Now, Wang Yi is expected to lay the groundwork for Putin's visit to Beijing for the Third Belt and Road Forum after an invitation by Xi during a high-profile visit to Moscow in March. Now, Putin is not known to have traveled abroad since the International Criminal Court issued a warrant against him on grounds of illegally deporting children from Ukraine. On the 1st of September, Putin said that he expected to meet Xi Jinping soon, but did not explicitly confirm that he would travel to China again. The warrant issued just days before Xi visited Russia obligates the court's 123 member states to arrest Putin and transfer him to The Hague for trial if he enters their territory. However, China is not a party to the Rome Statute that led to the establishment of the International Criminal Court in 2002. The Chinese foreign minister's visit will also see a detailed exchange of views on issues including Ukraine. Wang Yi last visited Russia in February on the eve of the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, alarming the US. Back then, Washington accused the two nations of sharing a vision in which borders could be redrawn by force. Now, Wang Yi also discussed the situation in Ukraine in his weekend meetings with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The U.S. and China are at odds over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China has refrained from taking sides in the war, saying that while the country's territory must be respected, the West needs to consider Russia's security concerns about NATO expansion. It has accused the U.S. of prolonging the fighting by providing arms to Ukraine. On the other hand, Western allies say the war has broken the entire security architecture built patiently on the European continent over many decades. The 31-nation NATO alliance says it is doing everything possible to avert a war similar to the one that ravaged Europe 80 years ago. Beijing's approach toward the Ukraine war has centered around avoiding any direct condemnation of Russia. At the same time, China has managed to cast the US as a strategic rival. Xi Jinping has been batting for a political settlement to the war in Ukraine, and China issued a 12-point proposal in February. Do these meetings mark a fresh peace push? Now, for more on this, we have with us Ben Aris, the founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews, also former Moscow bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph. Hello to you, Ben. Thank you for being with us. Now, what do we make of China's top diplomats' 4-day trip to Russia? What are we expecting from these meetings?
Well, indeed. I mean, as you mentioned in your report, that China already has offered a peace plan, a 12-point plan, which they floated on the anniversary of the start of the war at the end of February earlier this year. And I think at the end of the day, China would rather have not seen this war happen. It's very destabilizing. It's very destructive. It just inflames tensions that were already there between East and West, and not just between NATO and Russia, but indeed between America and China as well. And China's been put in the awkward position where, on the one hand, it backs Putin's idea that he doesn't want to see a unipolar world, in other words, a world led by the US, and would rather have a multipolar world. And China ascribes to that point of view as well. But the way of going about getting that multipolar world, in other words, by starting a war in Ukraine, which is what Putin has done, is not in Chinese interest. So they would like to see this go away. But they're in a tricky position whereby they want to see the war stop, but they need to back Russia. And the peace plan that they proposed in February was basically giving Russia everything that it's got. It froze the conflict, allowed Russia to retain the territories it had. It basically turned the whole of East Ukraine into a giant demilitarized zone. And that was never going to fly in Kiev, although Zelensky was very polite. He said, thank you very much, but we have our own plan. And here they're having another go. I think the difference now is the context has changed in so much as there's clearly some Ukraine fatigue in the West. And so another peace proposal might be there might be more room to make this one work, or at least to start the process of getting people around the negotiating table to talk about possibilities. Chinese plan as it stands is unacceptable, but I think people may be more prepared to talk now than they were 6 months ago.
And then is Xi Jinping pursuing a China-led settlement to the Ukraine crisis? And what would this mean for China on the global stage?
Well, you also have to bear in mind that here that Xi Jinping is not just playing to the Ukrainians, Russians and trying to stop the war. He's also playing to the gallery, to the global south. You know, we just had the BRICS summit in July and the G20 summit. And China is positioning itself here as a mediator, as someone that people in the global south, if they have a problem with the West, a showdown with the West in sanctions or whatever it is, that they can go to China as you know, an honest broker in order to represent their interests. And in that sense, it doesn't really matter if this peace process comes to fruition or not. China has positioned itself as this sort of, you know, neutral entity that can speak on behalf and represent the global markets, the emerging markets. And they're all very interested in that. By the same token, I think a lot of the global south has not adopted sanctions against Russia because they see Russia as a useful counterweight to the West and, you know, what they perceive as bullying and weaponization of the dollar, weaponization of trade sanctions, which is all very unsettling for the emerging markets because they're not close to the West and they fear that they could be in the front line or in the crosshairs of these regimes as well. And so they're looking to both China and Russia to counterbalance what they see as an aggressive West, or at least one that they don't share values with.
Right, and Ben, what are your thoughts on this visit by Wang being the laying of the groundwork for Putin's visit to Beijing for the Belt and Road Forum?
Well, indeed, the Chinese have been very active diplomatically. They since they had that very high-profile meeting in Moscow when Xi Jinping went to Russia, and he very clearly put himself in the "I support Russia" camp. At the same time, you can see that as sort of China coming out and, for the first time, overtly challenging the states as, you know, the preeminent power in the world, and that China was standing up and challenging America, openly defying it, in the sense that America was sanctioning, condemning Russia, and China was throwing support behind Russia. And there they were putting their hand up and say, actually, we're an alternative power in the world, and you need to take us seriously. And I think all this diplomacy that's traveling around, of course, we've got the UN General Meeting this week as well, excuse me, is part of that program, is part of China sort of putting itself at top table, and it wants to talk to all sides. It would like to de-escalate its tensions with the states because those in the South China Sea are extremely fraught. But it's a long, slow process of diplomacy. And so we're seeing the Chinese foreign minister, you know, talking to the Russians, Putin going to Beijing later this year, but at the same time, the Chinese met with Jake Sullivan, the US security advisor. And so they're trying to do sort of classic diplomacy in rather a tense situation.
Right, Ben, thank you very much for being with us and your valued insights there.
My pleasure.